This is The Weekly on clickorlando.com with Justin Warmoth.
Good morning, I'm Justin Warmoth. Last week, we told you about the lack of affordable housing in Central Florida, a problem that's getting worse, not better, at a time when everything is more expensive. Our focus this morning, sky-high rent prices. I spoke with Brian Carberry from rentpath.com about what's causing prices to spike over the last few months.
So rent prices really are up everywhere across the country. I mean, there are certain markets, certain areas where prices aren't rising as much or might actually be decreasing. But by and large, really everywhere that you look, you are seeing just this high demand for apartments. And that is really driving the increase in rent costs. There's just a lot of people on the market right now that are looking for a new place to live and just not a lot of available inventory. Occupancy rates are at a near all-time high. And there's just more people, as I said, just looking right now to find a new place to live that really weren't looking to move in the beginning parts of the pandemic. So really, we point to that supply and demand as that main factor. Of course, there's going to be certain micro level trends that we're seeing in one market compared to another that might be driving rent price increases in one area over another. But it really just does boil down to just this high demand and not a lot of inventory on that market.
Yeah, Orlando and the state of Florida really seeing that demand grow, especially over the last 2 years, really since the pandemic started. But I'm curious, just if is it more of a hike when it comes to apartments or rental housing and things like that? Is that also on the same trajectory or the same rate hike in the last year?
Right. And it really does depend on where you're looking and really what the inventory is like. There's just going to be certain areas, like let's just take like New York City, for example. You're not going to have a lot of rental homes in the market there, and you're going to be looking at apartments. Then you may look at a city like Orlando where you might have a mix. You've got apartments as you get into the more downtown areas, but then in some of the outer neighborhoods, you may have more rental homes. And it really just is what is on the market at the time. There was a big push during the pandemic for people to try to find more space to get out of these cramped downtown areas. It's not fun living in a studio apartment if you're working from home and you have to work in your bedroom and you really have no place to go. So a lot of people were looking for larger apartments, so 2-3 bedroom units, or we're looking for rental homes to kind of get that more space, get that more privacy. So there is that demand for that bigger space, for the privacy, for a rental home. I wouldn't really say that one is rising over the other. Just the demand is so high really for all types of rental properties that you can expect to see price increases pretty much regardless of what type of unit you're looking for.
I think it's important. Rent prices do gradually go up year over year. I think it's, as we've seen with gas prices, for instance, it's the rate at which the increase has occurred that is really leaving folks in a place where they have to reassess whether or not they can stay there, whether or not, especially if they don't work from home and their job is close by, then that commute starts to factor in because they have to move farther away from the city in which they work, which is a whole nother factor in this. And that's what I think is worrying a lot of people. Can you touch more on that?
Yeah, and that's a really good point. And during the pandemic, a lot of people did have that ability that they could either work from home or would able to move to places, just kind of take a year and live remotely and work remotely. And now, as a lot of offices are beginning to ask people to come back to work, we are seeing kind of that shift in what renters are looking for. And every renter is going to have their own set of priorities, what's important to them. And location always is going to be a main factor, but it's the location to what that is really kind of changing right now. Before it might have been location to work. Now it might be location to other things, location to outside spaces or not having to deal with a big commute or whatever it might be. So yes, you are seeing a lot of people are starting to consider like, okay, can I still live where I'm living because prices are going up? Yes, I am close to work, but do I really need to be close to work anymore? Or kind of vice versa, as people are trying to move back close to where their work is and are realizing these prices are going up. So it really is up to every individual renter to kind of prioritize and look at what their wants and their needs are and to determine, okay, is this location a big factor in where I need to live? Or can I move 5-10 miles away, have the same quality of life, maybe a little bit more affordable, but you kind of hit on the gas prices. And, hopefully these prices aren't skyrocketing, both rent and gas prices aren't skyrocketing for long. But if you do move further away, there are other costs that are going to be associated with that place that you do choose to settle down. So there's a lot of different factors that renters are going to need to keep in mind as they're really just trying to find where their next place to live is, or if they decide to stay or move somewhere else.
We do know gas prices go up, go down. But what about rent prices? Are those here to stay?
Yeah, so rent prices, if you look back traditionally, before the pandemic began, prices tend to go up in the summer and will be relatively flat in the fall, winter, and spring. And that's just because over the summer is when most people are looking for apartments. Kids are out of school. It's just an easy time for people to relocate. And this is a trend that we kind of do expect to see continue. When the pandemic began, prices stayed pretty much flat for about 9 months. That whole 2020, prices really didn't do anything, nationally at least. You are going to have certain markets. Again, every market is going to be kind of reacting differently. Some places went up, some places went down. Places like New York City, San Francisco, rent prices drastically decreased as people were leaving Manhattan, leaving downtown areas, just because, again, everything was shut down. They had nothing to do. There was no point in them staying there. So there really wasn't that demand in some of those areas. In 2021, we started to see people looking to move again, kind of figuring out what's going on with the world and going on with their housing situation. And it really was the summer of 2021 that we started to see people be willing to move, to look to a new place to live. And that's when these prices really started to skyrocket. And that was because you kind of saw 2 years worth of increases happening all at once. So when we see these rent prices that are up nationally right now, 20% for a 1-bedroom, 20% for a 2-bedroom, it's because we're looking at a time period when prices hadn't gone up. They had stayed relatively flat. As we get into the summer months, I do expect we are going to continue to see rent prices going up, but that rate of increase may not appear to be as significant or as severe because it's looking at against a time when prices had already jumped. So yes, prices are still going to go up. It's still going to be difficult for people to afford to pay in certain instances. If they have a couple $100 increase in their monthly rent that's not planned for, that is a challenge for a lot of people. But it kind of is all relative. If you kind of look at it, okay, what was it like this time last year? It's not going to seem as bad, but it is still going to be a rent price increase in a lot of areas, I do expect.
So what you're saying is essentially that these prices will level off to what the norm is just organically over time. And I think that leads into my next question, because I think some people they might be looking for something right now. They see the price, what it is, and they would like to try to stay around that same level. And maybe they're thinking, maybe should I sign a 2-year lease agreement? Is that something that they should consider?
It is something that you should consider. Landlords may be more willing to lock in your rate at more along the lines of where you are right now, if you are willing to stay a little bit longer, because then that means that they know that you're going to be there for 2 years. And they're not going to have to worry about finding a new tenant a year down the road should you leave. Landlords are, bottom line is they just want their units filled. They don't want any vacancies because that's how they get their money if they can collect their rent every month. It is a business. They are going to try to get as much for their properties or their units as they can, but they are going to be willing to work with you, especially if you've been there for a while. If you've been a good tenant, you haven't had any problems with neighbors, you've always paid your rent on time, whatever the situation might be. If you've been that ideal tenant that they're looking for, they are going to be more likely to listen to, be more likely to negotiate with you. The power really is with the landlords right now because of the whole supply and demand issue. Like, they know if you leave, there will be other people that are going to come and want to rent your unit. So be willing to work with them, be willing to listen to them, negotiate with them, kind of come in with a couple different ideas of what you might want to do.
And something the Fed is considering, increasing mortgage rates. We'll discuss whether that'll have an impact on the rental market right after this. Stay with us.
This is The Weekly on clickorlando.com with Justin Warmoth.
Welcome back. With record-breaking inflation, everything is more expensive right now. Rent prices are no exception. In fact, they're actually outpacing the inflation rate, and more folks are getting priced out of their homes. Brian Carberry from rentpath.com is back with us to explain what it's going to take for the rental market to cool off.
We do see a number of new apartments going up here in the Orlando area, throughout Central Florida. They're taking shape. The need is there. It hasn't caught up, but we're seeing those new apartments coming in. when it comes historically speaking, do those should someone maybe being like the first tenant of those new apartments, and trying to take advantage of maybe getting in on the base rate or whatever they're trying to attract new people? Is that a tactic that they should use?
I think it depends.
Mhm.
That is a tactic that you can try. You need to be a little bit more flexible on that move-in date, because you may have to sign a lease, or at least agree to a lease months before you're able to move in somewhere. And then you kind of have to figure out, okay, what are you going to do in that short term? It really does depend on every single market. Obviously, you're going to have certain neighborhoods in Orlando that are going to be a lot higher demand than other neighborhoods. And at some point, the market is going to get kind of oversaturated with these newer properties. And a lot of these newer properties, you need to keep in mind that, yes, it is going to add more units that are available. It's going to kind of decrease, that demand. But these newer units more than likely are going to be priced a little bit higher, because they're going to be these Class A properties, which more often than not are more luxurious, more updated, newer, and they're going to be priced higher than what the average is already. So when you have more higher priced units coming on the market, it's going to slide that average up, because it's just going to move that curve. Now, some of these may be marked as more affordable housing, and hopefully they are, and that'll kind of hopefully level things off a little bit. But a lot of the newer units that are coming on the market are going to be more pricey. So you really just kind of have to look and see, like, is it worth the price that they're offering? And if that price goes up, what's it going to do to the other units that are on the market? Are other properties going to be willing to lower their price, try to compete against that? Kind of like when you see gas stations, like opposing corners, kind of having a battle as they lower their prices to try to attract as many cars as possible. You may see something similar if you have, a couple apartment complexes all within a block. I wouldn't sit here and wait for that. I wouldn't hold my breath and hope that that's an option, because it may not be. But it's just a lot of things to keep in mind as you are looking for a property, especially when there are newer properties coming on the market. And again, it really does boil down to every individual renter, and they need to see what is right for them, what they feel comfortable doing, and what makes sense for them. And that if it works, everything works, and you feel comfortable, I would advise you to kind of go with your gut.
Mm-hmm. Housing affordability versus affordable housing, two different things, obviously. And so what we're seeing here in the city of Orlando and really across the state of Florida is a critical need for affordable housing, while at the same time, housing affordability is becoming more of a concern simultaneously. And listen, I know that you're based in Atlanta, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
But when it comes down to this, is really a crisis across the country. Is there anything that, in your expertise, should happen to address this, and the best remedies that, whether it's on the city, state, or federal level, can really ease the burden for so many families and an increasing number of families across the country?
Yeah, it's a tough situation right now, and affordable housing really has been an issue for years. I mean, way before the pandemic, we were talking about affordable housing, and it's something that certain cities and certain areas are kind of starting to notice and take a little bit more seriously. And it really kind of does boil down. It has to start kind of at that city level for people to recognize what the need is, and seeing some of these longtime residents being forced out as newer properties come on, or if you're looking at a residential neighborhood where it's homes, you're seeing investors come in and buy something and then either sell it or rent it out, and kind of forcing out these longtime residents. And I think a lot of cities across the country are beginning to recognize that this is a problem, and are starting to enact certain legislation that requires a certain percentage of units that are built to be more affordable. I think that's a good baby step, but I really do think that this is an issue that isn't going to go away anytime soon. I don't have an answer for what that solution needs to be, unfortunately. I mean, people that make more money than I do, and kind of like the civic level, that's up to them to decide. I do think that if you ask any person on the street, they would agree that this is an issue, that something needs to be done. I hope that lawmakers are taking it seriously, and I do think some are. I don't think enough are, but I do think some are. And there are definitely certain cities across the country where you are seeing kind of more of a push for it. And again, that's a great start, but definitely more needs to be done.
Let me ask you this: increased interest rates and those going up, whether or not the Fed does that, how much of a factor would that have if home prices start to level off a little bit? Would it be an immediate impact that we would see rent doing the same thing, or would that take a little bit longer to kind of kick in?
I think you're going to see a little bit of a delay. And I mean, this is the classic chicken and the egg argument, like what is really driving the other. I think when you look back over the pandemic, you really saw the housing market start to take off kind of at the end of 2020, beginning of 2021 was when prices just really kind of skyrocketed. It's more or less kind of leveled off depending on where you look. And it really was the rental market was about 6, 7, 8 months kind of delayed when we saw the rental market kind of skyrocket. I do think, though, as the housing market begins to cool, if interest rates do go up and there are fewer people looking to buy, it's going to kind of decrease that competition in the housing market, and prices then may start to kind of cool off, start to come down. And then you may see people that were renting, that were waiting, think about home buying again. One thing you do have to consider, though, is that there were a lot of people that were renters that wanted to buy homes that were priced out and still are priced out, or they've had financial difficulty during the pandemic and say they had, 20 grand, 30 grand, whatever it is set aside for a down payment on their home. And they were laid off or they were furloughed or they had a medical issue and they had to dip into that nest egg. And now they don't have that down payment money anymore and they need to wait to buy. So it's not going to be kind of that magic, remedy that is going to suddenly say, okay, great, the housing market has cooled off. Now the rental market's going to do the same. There's still going to be a lot of factors at play. There's still going to be a lot of renters that want to buy that are just unable to do so, especially with rent costs going up. If they renew and suddenly they're paying a couple extra $100 a month, that's more money that they don't have that they're able to save. So just a lot of things at place. I do think if the housing market does cool off, you may see the rental market begin to cool off as well. It's going to take some time, though. It's not going to be an immediate thing.
And again, on last week's episode, we told you about the lack of affordable housing in Central Florida and some of the steps advocates are taking to improve the issue. You can find that interview and much more on clickorlando.com/weekly. I'm Justin Wormuth. Hope you have a great Sunday.